Hi fellow Django developers, Hezekiah here from alwaysdjango.com, where we discuss interesting Django topics that help you grow, improve as a Django developer. So if that sounds interesting, like, subscribe, share this video with anyone you think will find this video interesting. Let's get into it. So in the last tutorials where we discussed how to render templates in Django, how to render HTML templates in Django, we stopped here, right? So this should be the 7th video in our Django Absolute Beginner playlist. If you don't know about the playlist, I'll leave a link to it in the description. We're discussing everything about Django, right? So in the last tutorials, we were able to render this on the on our browser, right? We are able to render this index.html template on the browser, right? So if we go to our urls.py file, we assign this URL. If you don't know about URLs and views in Django, we also have a tutorial on it. The last 2 or 3 tutorials, you can go check it out. Just click on the playlist link, you see those videos, right? So if we open our browser right now, our server is running here. Our server is running right here. If you open our browser, go to go to 12, then go to /book. We see this, right, which is simply our index.html file, right? So I mentioned that in this tutorial we'll be looking at how to render, we'll be looking at 4 things. Actually, we'll be looking at how to render out template variable passed into the template. We'll be looking at loops. Actually, we'll have the things we'll be looking at here. So we'll be looking at template variables, we'll be looking at template conditionals, we'll be looking at template loops, we'll be looking at template filters, right? So let's get into it. The first one, template variables. So template variables, like I mentioned, in the render function in Django, from Django.shortcuts, we import render. So this third argument here is optional, right? Is a context. Context is like something, variables that will pass into this index.html file that can be used in this index file, right? For instance, right here, we are passing in the user ID, right? So note that this context is optional, right? You might not pass it, right? But in this case, we are passing it, so you might not pass it, it will still work. So if we go to our browser right now and reload, it's still working, right? So but right now we are passing this context. So how do we use this? Be able to render out this template variable, right? So in Django, to render out variables in your template, you use the Ginger template syntax, right? What the Ginger template syntax is called curly braces, right? 2 curly braces, open and close, right? You open it, you open 2 curly braces, you close 2 curly braces. Sorry, you open 2 curly braces, you close 2 curly braces. Now in between these curly braces, here is where you enter the name of the variable. So what is the name of our variable? The name of our variable in this case is user ID, right? So here is the name of the variable, here is the value. So user ID, will copy it, will come here and we enter it. Let's put this in the H1 or H2, right? Let's put this in the H2. Let me copy this. Yeah, so let's see if we see this in our template. Fingers crossed. What we have here, we have it as 1 right here. So if we go back to our, we are seeing 1 here, right? So if we should update it to maybe whatever, reload, we are seeing it right here. So that's it, guys. That's it. That's the first point done. First thing we want to treat in this tutorial done. Template variable, how to render it how to render templates in your variable. Templates pass through the Django render context. How to render it in your template. So that's the first one done. Let's cancel it out here. We are done with this one. So the second one is the template conditionals, right? So what do I mean by template conditionals? Template conditionals, like in programming generally, conditionals are like if statements, right? So if this, do this, if this, do that, right? So we are going to look at, so let's pass a template variable here and say maybe if the user is an admin, if the user is not, if the user, let's say we have an admin indicator, like a property. We'll look at models, right? So in the next tutorials we'll look at model. Maybe the tutorial after this we'll probably look at model, right? So let's say in the user model we have an is admin field, right, that is used to identify if a user is an admin or not, right? So let's say user is admin, right? Let's say for now, let's say true, right? Let's say yes, this user is an admin, right? So let's pass in this template variable. Let's pass in this as a template variable, right? So we're passing in this argument right here as a template variable. So what's the argument? Is a boolean, right? And we know what booleans are used for. They're used for conditionals, right? So let's come here. Let's say if the user is an admin, we want to display a button. If it's not an admin, we don't want to display that button, right? So let's come right here. Let's display the button for now. Let's display the button. So we'll go to our template. We'll reload. Maybe our server is not on. Our template server is not on. Let's reload this. So we'll go back, we reload, we see the button here, right? So let's make a conditional to show this button depending on if the user is an admin or if he is not an admin, he or she is not an admin, right? So to make conditionals in Django templates, we also use Ginger template syntax, right? So we make two curly braces, this one, open it and close, open and close. Now in between this, we say percentage sign, we say if user is admin. Let's see if it's what we are naming this. If user is admin, let's copy this. If user is admin, right, let's show the button, else I'll explain everything, guys. Let's say else, we say you are not an admin, right? So what are we doing here, right? So you know that we mentioned that to render out template variables you use two curly braces, but right now we are not trying to render out template variables, we are trying to use conditionals, right? So what to render out conditionals, to use conditionals, we open this template, this curly braces, but instead of another curly braces we use this percentage sign here. So this percentage sign is used to tell Django that hey, we are not rendering out a template variable, we are simply going to run a process, right? So that's what this curly braces does here. So if user is admin, do this, right, else do this, then we end our if statement, right? So let's go to our browser and reload. If we go here and reload, we see the button right now because we said that the user is an admin. So let's change this to false. Let's say the user is no longer an admin. Let's go back and reload. You are not an admin, right? So let's say let's make maybe else if, right? So if user is admin, do this, else if I'm right. So else if user is super, right? Let's say we have user is super. Let's pass in super user in our template. Is maybe true. So let's have this and this, right? So we're passing user is super. Let's say we have another variable that we're passing, that user in the user model will have another variable user is super, right? So in a template, what it's reading now is if the user is an admin, right, we render out this button, right? Else if the user is a super user, we render out, let's say you are a super user, right? So if the user is an admin, it renders out the button and ends the block, right? Else if the user is super, right, it renders out you are a super user. Then if he is not an admin and he's not a super user, you render out you are not an admin or a super user, right? I think I think this should be like this, right? So ELIF, because it's Python, right? So you are a super user. Why? Because the super user variable here is true, right? So the user is a super user because the super user variable here is true. Let's say this is false. So in this case, the user is admin is false, user is super is false. So what do we expect? You are not a super user and you are not an admin user. So let's reload. You are not a super user, you are not an admin user, right? So let's go back to our board. So right now the template variable is done, the template conditionals is done, right? The next thing will be template loops, right? So what are loops? Loops are simply like, for instance, you are passing in, right now we are passing in simple variables, right? But in future, when like we get, for instance, we get books, a list of books stored by a user, right? List of books is not a single list of books is not a single. Let's remove all these. So a list is not a single is not a single content, right? It contains many other variables. So let's say, for instance, we say have books right here, right? And this is a list, and inside that book we have our first book. Maybe ID is, let's say, the ID of this book is, let's say, 1. Then name of this book is learning Django, and then we have another book. Let's say the second book here, we have this is the second book, and we have the third book, learning Python. Let's say this is learning React, right? So this is ID2, this is ID3, right? So let's pass this into our template. So how do we pass this into our template? Let's copy this, we'll copy this, come to our context, right? So we are rendering this out in our template, right? So to get access to, we want to loop over this books array, loop over this book list. In Python they call them list. So loop over this books list and get this single dictionaries, right? So let's go back to our template. Let's remove this, right? So like always, we have curly braces, right? So but right now, remember, we are not rendering out a variable, we are simply going to run a process. So what do? We enter the percentage sign. So what we are going to say is for book and books, right? Let's end this, end for, right? So what we are saying is that for book in books, do this, run this block of code right here, right? So let's say for books, book is book. Let's say h3 book name is. So what are we trying to do here? We are trying to render out a variable. We are not trying to run a process right here. So what's the variable we are trying to render out? The book, but not simply the book, this is the dictionary. What are we trying to render out? So in the loop, we run through this loop. The first instance is this dictionary, right? So in this dictionary, we have .book, we have .id. So what are we trying to render out here? We say .name, right? So what will happen right now is that this loop will run over this variable. This loop will run over this list right here. In the first instance, it will meet this dictionary. In the second instance, it will meet this dictionary, So at each instance, it will access and output the name of the book, right? If that is clear. So let's go back to our browser and reload, right? So we see right here, book name, learning Django, learning Python, learning React. Again, that's what we have here in this template. That's what we have here in these books, right? So if you want to output the ID, let's say we change this to ID and change this to ID, right? So book ID, we'll go back to and reload, book ID 1, 2, 3, right? So that's the third one done. So we cancel this, right? So the fourth one is the template filters, right? So what are template filters? Template filters are simply like filters. We use them to process templates. What do I mean by process template? Let's say maybe you want to, you have a variable you have a variable, maybe a string, right, and you want to output it as uppercase, right, for instance, right? So let's say let's pass in a string right here. Let's pass in a string right here. Let's say book name is equal to learning Django, right? So we output book name, then book name, book name, right? So let's say we want to render out this book name as an uppercase, right? So if we go back to our template, we do this, right? What do we have? We simply have the name of the book, which is learning Django, right? So but if we want to filter out, if we want to add more extra power, right, make this have extra performance, right, that's when we use filters. So there are many filters but for in this case we are going to use template filters. If we come here, we see built-in template filters and tags in Django. So if you come here, you can look at many template filters and tags in Django. So right here we have the comment. So let's look at this comment tag, right? So some of them are called tags, some of them are called fields. So let's look at this comment tag. So the comment is simply used to make comments, right? You want to make comments. So what are comments? Things that you are just using to maybe as a reminder or maybe to comment on your code or what have you. So to use a comment in Django, we come here, we say comment, right? So we end it here, we say end comment, right? So if we come here and type whatever, let's just type whatever and come to our browser, refresh, we don't see it, right, because it's simply a comment, right? So comment, this is the tag we use for making comments, right? So this is it, guys. I think we are done for this tutorial. We are gone through. So we have looked at template variables, template conditionals, template loops, and template filters, right? So I'll leave a link to this article right here so that you can look at it, you can read it up. It's the Django official documentation. You can look at it and read it up. There are many filters you can look at, right? So for most of our tutorial codes, right, I will be pushing it to this GitHub repository, right? This GitHub repository, YouTube Complete, my GitHub repository, YouTube Complete Django Beginner playlist, right? I'll leave a link to it in the description. So if you come to this repository, right, if you come here to the branches, you get a list of branches. Now in these branches, if you want to maybe look at the code for the URLs and views tutorial, you come here and click on the branch. If you want to look at the code for models and database and what have you, you come here and click on the branch. You can then maybe download the zip code or git clone it, right? So that's it for this. In the next tutorial, we should be looking at Django models, right? Django models and databasing and migration and running migrations and what have you. So if you don't know about that, turn off the subscribe, turn off the notification, like this video, and that's it for me, guys. Just stay in tune, take care of yourself, and peace.